Good afternoon, my dear friends. I'm a little bit later this week of speaking with you guys than I have been in the past, but this has been kind of a hectic week. And not just for me, but for all of us. It's Fair Week here in Iowa, and so that makes it a really hectic week for many, many people. And so it is my hope and prayer that as we prepare to begin our journey together for this week with our YouTube video, that whoever you are and wherever you are, that you're having a wonderful time, that you're staying hydrated, that you're staying cool, that you're safe, and that you are rejoicing in the fact that you are a child of God in this day and at the time and place that you are. And so, my friends, again, I'm delighted to be with you. I am Pastor Brandon Campbell, and I'd like to talk to you today about some scriptures that I didn't get the chance to talk about in church this past Sunday. Now, for those who attend worship here at the Monroe United Methodist Church, I gave you guys an option at the beginning of the sermon time. I said that I could talk about Isaiah and the love song that the prophet Isaiah offered up in praise of God and in description of God, or we could talk about the letter to the Hebrews, and we could talk a little bit about the great cloud of witnesses and the heroes of the faith, not just the heroes of the Christian faith, not just the heroes of the Jewish faith, but also our own personal heroes of faith, because they are also part of that great cloud of witnesses. Now, we got a robust response from both sides, but the passage from the Hebrews ended up winning out. And so today I wanted to talk to you guys about the passage from Isaiah. But to make sure that you know exactly what I'm talking about, I'd like to read our scripture passages. And we will start with the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. He expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. And now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and it shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of the hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but saw bloodshed, righteousness, but heard a cry. I'd like to turn next to a selection from Psalm number 80. I'd like to read verses 1 and 2, and then verses 8 through 19. Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock. You who are enthroned upon the cherubim, shine forth. Before Ephraim and Benjamin and Manasseh, stir up your might and come to save us. You brought a vine out of Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it. It took deep root and filled the land. The mountains were covered with its shade, the mighty cedars with its branches. It sent out its branches to the sea and its shoots to the river. Why then have you broken down its walls, so that all who pass along the way pluck its fruit? The boar from the forest ravages it, and all that move in the field feed on it. Turn again, O God of hosts, look down from heaven and see. Have regard for this vine, the stalk that your right hand planted. They have burned it with fire, they have cut it down. May they perish at the rebuke of your countenance. But let your hand be upon the one at your right hand, the one whom you made strong for yourself. Then we will never turn back from you. Give us life, and we will call on your name. Restore us, O Lord God of hosts. Let your face shine, that we may be saved. I would like to turn next to the passage from the Hebrews, the passage that we discussed during the sermon in church this past Sunday. And that's Hebrews chapter 11, verse 29, carrying on through chapter 12, verse 2. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land. But when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had received the spies in peace. And what more should I say? For time would fail me to talk of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, and in caves and holes in the ground. Yet all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so that they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who, for the sake of the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. And our final reading for this week, our gospel reading, will come from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 12, verses 49 through 56. These are the words of Christ, surprising though it may seem. This is Jesus wishing that the destruction of the earth and of the peoples was already begun. I came to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what stress I am under until it is completed. Do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, 5 in one household will be divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Jesus also said to the crowds, "When you see a cloud rising in the west, you immediately say, 'It is going to rain,' and so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, 'There will be scorching heat,' and it happens. You hypocrites! You know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time?" Thus ends the reading of God's Word. Thanks be to God. When I opted to speak this past week, I said that the idea of the cloud of witnesses is a beautiful idea, and the knowledge that those people who helped me to become who I am, those people who were instrumental in my formation, knowing that they are still there, that their wisdom did not pass away, that their lessons did not simply dry up and blow away, but that they have left a mark on me, that through their witness and through their lives I have become a better person. Recognizing that that is still part of my life, that as I come into the church, I stand in the presence of all of those who have fought and labored to build the church up. That is a terribly meaningful thing to me. But I also think that Isaiah's love song is also terribly significant. And so I wanted to take a moment today, in this place and in this forum, to talk a little bit about just what Isaiah was saying, about how Isaiah was representing the character of God. So in this love song, which I think is probably where we should start, because the prophet declares, "This is the love song that I will sing for my beloved, for my God." And then Isaiah goes on to describe the actions of God, the labors of God, the preparations made by God. How God had created a vineyard, and God had gone out and found the best plants, that God had set high walls so that nobody could break in and steal, so that no animal could wander in and forage and destroy. God had even set a watchtower in the middle of it in order that the planting of God may dwell secure, under the oversight of an eternal and watchful eye. And yet, surprise of surprises, though God has done so much for God's vineyard, things go awry. I'm reminded of Robert Burns' Ode to a Mouse upon turning over her nest with the plow. The best laid plans of mice and men oft go awry. In this case, this is a plan of God. But because God chose to endow humanity with free will, because God gave humans agency in choosing who they would be and how they would act, the plan has gone awry. God has provided everything that humanity has needed to grow strong and to grow proper, in order to bear fruit and in order to be useful. And yet, somehow, humanity has found a way to cease bearing proper fruit. Humanity has found a way to cease doing the proper response to God's goodness and care. And so these good and choice vines that God has painstakingly selected, they bear not full fruit, not wonderful sweet fruit, not fruit that is to be used for future endeavors, but rather they bear wild grapes. Grapes that are sour, grapes that are bitter, grapes that will never make a good wine. Grapes that are hard, grapes that are shriveled. And so, as we read this passage, we have to think about what it means for our lives to be wild grapes. We have to think about the ways in which we have failed to be an obedient church. We have to think about ways in which we have failed to reach up to the moniker of God's grandest creation. We have to think about the fact that God gave us a commandment from the beginning to be joyful, to be fruitful, and multiply. And instead, we have created a world where for so many people it is impossible to be joyful. It is impossible to be fruitful. And we do not let our joys, we do not let our treasures, we do not let ourselves multiply, but rather our joys, our treasures, and ourselves wind up diminishing. We don't produce those rich, full, juicy grapes. Instead, we produce small, shriveled, hard pieces of matter that don't do any good. And so today, I would like to invite you guys to think about why the prophet Isaiah called this a love song. Because in the verses, it seems very much like God is issuing a condemnation. That does not, to me, sound like a love song. And yet the prophet insists from the beginning, this is the love song that I will sing for my beloved. And so we have the antagonist, the one who opposes God, being humanity. And so we must then look, after humanity has taken their stance, after humanity has stood in opposition to God, how does God respond to us? The answer, as near as I can tell, is that God breaks down the walls. God knocks down the walls of the vineyard. God destroys the hedge that protected the grapes from the elements and from any interlopers. God allows the grapes to be subject to the rest of the world. Now we can look at this and say this is a condemnation. This is God allowing God's people to be destroyed. We read the words, my vineyard, it shall be devoured. It shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and it shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but saw bloodshed, righteousness, but heard a cry. So, at a surface reading, it would seem that God is just giving up. It would seem that God is prepared to wipe the slate clean. And yet, even like in the story of the great flood, a remnant is always saved. God never destroys all of creation. God never destroys all of humanity. Now that might not be very good comfort. It might be scarce comfort for those who are in the midst of destruction, for those who are in the midst of trial. But the thing to remember is that in the times in which Isaiah was prophesying, having a vineyard was a symbol of status. It was something that these individuals who owned and planted vineyards, they put their time, they put their money, they put their treasures, they put their resources, and they put their reputation into. And so if you have a bad year in your vineyard, if you have a planting of grapes that do not produce the way you want, if you have a planting of grapes that do not bring fruit to you, you don't burn down the entire operation. There is still another season to come. And I find it terribly important to remember that the Lord of all seasons understands that. Solomon, as a young man, he was appealed to by God, and God said, "You are to lead my people. You are to be king over my people, and so I would help you. I would offer you whatever it is that you believe that you need in order that my people are cared for. What would you have from me?" Now, Solomon could have asked for anything. Solomon could have asked for immortality, said, "If you want me to be the king of your people, let me live forever. Let me guide them forever. Let my hand be the one that directs them forever." Solomon could have asked for military might, said, "There are enemies all about. There may even be enemies from within. If you want me to be an effective king, make me powerful. Ensure that I can engage in conquest to provide for my people and protect my people." Solomon could have said, "I want to be rich. I want to be so rich that the rest of the world will have no choice but to recognize your people, Lord, because of how wealthy, because of the status that we have attained." Solomon didn't ask for any of that. Solomon didn't ask for anything that would exemplify himself. Solomon instead said, "Lord, give me the proper wisdom to lead your people. Teach me the knowledge of good and evil." Now, it's very unique in this passage that Solomon asks for the knowledge of good and evil, because if we flip back to the very beginning, when we go back to Genesis chapter 2 and we hear about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, there is one tree which God tells them they are not allowed to eat from. That tree is the knowledge of good and evil. And so, when Adam and Eve do eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they are banished from the garden. And yet, we fast forward a little ways into Hebrew history and we hear about King Solomon. What does Solomon ask? For the very same thing that got Adam and Eve ejected from the garden. And God approves. God approves because of the spirit in which Solomon asked. When Eve was tempted by the serpent said, "You can become like God." And so Eve went and she gathered the fruit and she went to Adam and said, "Adam, you and I can be as gods." And so the two of them made the decision together because they wanted this for themselves. Not for who would come after them, not for those to whom they were beholden, but because they wanted power, because they wanted to rise above their station. However, Solomon didn't say, "I wish to be the wisest king so that I will be remembered forever," even though he was. When we talk about King Solomon, what we think of is the wisest man ever, the wisest of all of the kings of the Hebrews. But Solomon didn't want wisdom for his own sake. He didn't even want wisdom for wisdom's sake. Solomon wanted that wisdom so that he could be an effective leader for God's people. Solomon's focus was never on himself. It was always on everyone else who he could serve. And so, even though the gift was exactly the same, the reason for asking and the spirit of the ask was entirely different. And so Solomon is celebrated. And when we read the book of Ecclesiastes, generally held to be written by King Solomon, we hear There is a time for every purpose. There is a season to every activity under heaven. And God is the God of them all. God is the God of rejoicing. God is the God of weeping. God is the God of living. God is the God of dying. God rules over it all, no matter what state we find ourselves in, whether it's in those joyous states or whether it's in the devastating ones. God is still God and still calls us and cares for us. So whether we find our lives to be producing the appropriate fruit, whether we are producing those choicest of all grapes, or whether we are that stunted vine that's producing those shriveled, hard pieces of nothing, those insults to the one who has planted us, God is still our God. And that same God of each and every season knows that even though I have not always produced the right fruit, even though I have not always produced any fruit at all, there is still hope for me, because there is another season in the coming year. Jesus used that same literary allusion, where he told a parable about a tree that failed to produce fruit. And so the landowner said, "There is no reason for this tree to be on my land. It has failed me again and again and again. Dig it up and let's replace it with something that works." But the gardener said, "Give me one more season." God is the gardener. Christ is the gardener. The one who believes in the potential that you and I have. Even if one year we produce bad grapes, even if one year we produce no grapes, there is still another season for us. And so, though God let the vineyard fall for 1 year, it is my belief, it is my faith, that there is still another year, and that God's eyes are towards that future. God's eyes are to the future that I can create. Maybe not the rut that I find myself in right now, maybe not the midst of my poor situation, but what can be. It is also my belief that every single one of us, each person who hears my voice and every person who has never and will never hear my voice, there is potential for each one of them. There is potential for me, there is potential for you, and there is potential for all of those people that you and I know, and all of those people that you and I do not know. And God believes in all of us. Even, and maybe even especially, when we are having a bad year. Even, and perhaps especially, when we are not bearing the right kind of fruit, or when we are not bearing any fruit at all. God still believes. We may be opened up to a struggle, and yet we must remember that without the struggle, the butterfly would never make its way out of the cocoon. Without the struggle, the butterfly would never produce its beautiful wings. Without the struggle, there would be nothing more than a bunch of hairy, ugly worms. The struggle allows us to become something more than what we had been. And so I personally thank God for that struggle. I thank God that when I do wrong, when I do not produce fruit, when I do not live up to my potential, that God allows me to struggle so that I can catch glimpses of that potential on the horizon. I thank God that I find those challenges in my life, because if I lived entirely a life of blessed ease, my life would be so boring and so vapid. Today, I celebrate that sometimes those vineyard walls do fall down, that sometimes the hedge is plucked up, that sometimes the rain is withheld. But I also celebrate that the reason those things happen is so that next year, in the right season, I have the chance to produce again. After I have had my season of growth, after I have had my season of development, after I have had my season of struggle, there is still potential for me. And there is potential for every single one of us. And so, my friends, I hope that you are at a place where you can rejoice in the struggles that you have faced. I hope that you are at a place where you can recognize that even though you may walk through that valley of the shadow, even though you may be in the depths of despair, God believes in you, and you have another season in your future. Thanks be to God. My friends, again, I hope that you're having a wonderful week. I hope that wherever you are, you're having a fantastic time there. And I hope you know that always and everywhere, you are a child of God. That always and everywhere, you have untapped potential. That always and everywhere, I believe in you. And much, much more importantly, God believes in you. Thank you, my friends. Have a wonderful week, and I'll be back again in church on Sunday and back here on YouTube to join in with you next week. God bless you all. Goodbye.